Here's something most people miss about crypto adoption. It's not happening where you think it is. While Silicon Valley debates the perfect DeFi protocol, millions of people in the Philippines are already scanning QR codes to send money across borders. And now Tether just made a bet that this is the future.
The really interesting part, this might be the first time emerging markets aren't waiting for Western tech to trickle down. They're building the infrastructure everyone else will copy.
Today, we're talking about Tether's investment in a company called SQRIL. And if you haven't heard of them, that's exactly why this matters. All right, so Tether just announced they've invested in SQRIL. Undisclosed amount, which is typical for these strategic deals. Ben, for people who don't know, what is SQRIL actually doing?
SQRIL is essentially building payment rails for QR code transactions across borders. Think of it like this. You're a tourist in Vietnam, you want to buy street food, the vendor has a QR code, you scan it with your home banking app, pay in dollars, and they instantly receive Vietnamese dong. SQRIL handles all the currency conversion and settlement in the background.
So it's not a consumer app itself.
Exactly, it's infrastructure. They've built APIs that let existing banks and fintech apps, Venmo, Revolut, even traditional banks like Barclays, plug into local QR payment networks. One integration, dozens of countries.
And they're currently live in the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, expanding to more countries in Africa and Latin America this quarter.
Right. These are markets where QR codes aren't just common, they're how most people pay for everything. They leapfrog the whole credit card infrastructure era.
Okay, let's dig into why this matters, because on the surface, this sounds like just another fintech partnership. Tether invests in payment company, we've seen this before.
The key is understanding what's actually broken in cross-border payments right now. When you send money internationally through traditional banking, it goes through correspondent banking networks, multiple intermediaries, each taking a cut, each adding time. A payment from the US to the Philippines might touch 4 or 5 banks before it arrives.
And that's why remittances are so expensive.
Exactly. The World Bank estimates the global average cost of sending remittances is still around 6 to 7%. For someone sending a few $100s home to family, that's a meaningful chunk, and the time delay can be days.
So where do stablecoins come in?
Stablecoins like USDT settle on blockchains, which means they move 24/7, nearly instantly, and the network doesn't care if you're sending money next door or across the ocean. The cost is the same. What SQRIL is doing is connecting that infrastructure to something people already use every day, QR codes.
Walk me through how that actually works in practice.
So imagine you're that tourist in Vietnam again. You scan the merchant's QR code. Behind the scenes, SQRIL's system might convert your dollars to USDT, move that stablecoin across borders in seconds, then immediately convert it to Vietnamese dong and settle it into the merchant's local bank account. The merchant never touches crypto, never sees a wallet address. They just see money in their account.
That's the critical part, right? The merchant experience has to be invisible.
Completely invisible. If you ask a street vendor in Manila to download MetaMask and accept USDC, you've already lost. But if you tell them, just keep using the same QR code you use for everything else, and now tourists can pay you too, that works.
So Tether is betting that the path to mainstream crypto adoption isn't getting everyone to use crypto apps. It's embedding crypto rails into systems people already trust.
And betting that emerging markets figured this out first, which historically is not how technology usually flows. You mentioned that. Let's talk about it, because I think that's one of the most interesting angles here. Normally, we see innovation happen in developed markets first, then eventually spread elsewhere.
Right. The US got credit cards in the 60s. China got them decades later. But by the 2010s, they had largely skipped them entirely and gone straight to QR-based payment systems like WeChat Pay and Alipay. These systems now process billions of transactions.
And they're cheaper and faster than credit cards. Much cheaper. A QR code transaction in Asia might cost a merchant a fraction of a percent. Compare that to 2 to 3% for credit cards in the US. Plus, there's no terminal hardware to buy. A printed QR code works just as well as a fancy POS system.
So SQRIL's argument is basically the rest of the world is going to wake up and realize QR codes are better, and stablecoins make them work internationally. That's the addition. Domestically, QR codes already work great in Asia, but if you want cross-border functionality without high fees, you need better rails than correspondent banking. Stablecoins provide that. Do you think that's realistic? Are we really going to see QR code payments take off in the US or Europe?
I'm skeptical that it replaces cards entirely in developed markets. Too much infrastructure already exists, too much consumer habit. But for specific use cases, especially cross-border tourism, remittances, B2B payments, it makes a lot of sense. And those are huge markets.
One thing I'm curious about, because we talk about this a lot on the show, is where the actual blockchain infrastructure sits in all this. Is SQRIL building on public chains, private systems? What's the architecture?
That's the interesting question that's not fully answered in the announcement. We know they're integrating stablecoins, and Tether's USDT runs primarily on Ethereum and Tron, so presumably there's settlement happening on those chains behind the scenes.
But the front-end user experience is completely abstracted away from that.
Right, and that raises some important questions about where value accrues, who controls the rails, and what happens if the underlying blockchain has issues. If Ethereum gas fees spike, does that break SQRIL's economics? Probably not for USDT on Tron, which is cheap, but these are the infrastructure details that matter long-term.
This also makes me think about the gas fee problem more broadly. One of the big challenges with crypto payments is figuring out who pays the transaction fees. If I'm a merchant, I don't want to deal with that.
This is where infrastructure design really matters. In most blockchain architectures, someone has to pay gas fees for every transaction. In a payment system, that's typically handled by the platform itself or built into the pricing somehow. But it's a real cost that has to be accounted for.
And this is where different chains have tried different approaches.
Right. Without getting too into the weeds, some protocols have experimented with models where the application pays gas fees instead of users. ICP's reverse gas model is probably the most developed version of this. Smart contracts can pay for their own computation, which means you can build applications where end users never think about gas fees at all.
Would that matter for something like SQRIL?
If you're building a payment system where you want merchants to have zero friction, not having to worry about gas economics at all is valuable. But I should be clear, we don't know what SQRIL's actual architecture looks like. They might be handling this in completely different ways, or using chains where gas is cheap enough it doesn't matter. This is just one approach to the problem.
Fair enough. I think the broader point is that for this kind of infrastructure to really scale, all these back-end complexity questions have to have good answers. Let's talk about what could go wrong here, because every time we see a headline like stablecoins plus emerging markets equals crypto adoption, I want to pump the brakes and ask about the risks.
Good instinct. So first, regulatory risk is enormous. Stablecoins are under increasing scrutiny globally. Different countries are taking very different approaches. Some are embracing them, some are trying to ban them in favor of CBDCs, some are still figuring it out.
And SQRIL is operating across multiple jurisdictions.
Exactly. That's incredibly complex. You need to comply with payment regulations, money transmission laws, KYC requirements, and increasingly, stablecoin-specific regulations in dozens of countries. That's not a technical problem. It's a legal and compliance one.
So what about the merchant side? Is there actual demand for this?
That's the real test. Merchants in these countries already have working payment systems. They're not sitting around desperate for tourists to pay them in stablecoins. So SQRIL has to prove they offer something meaningfully better: lower fees, faster settlement, access to international customers who currently can't pay easily. If the value proposition isn't clear, adoption stalls.
And there's concentration risk with Tether itself.
Yeah, USDT dominates stablecoin volume, but it's also controversial. Questions about reserves, transparency, regulatory status. If something happened to Tether, any infrastructure heavily dependent on USDT would have a serious problem. Diversification matters.
So this isn't a slam dunk.
Nothing ever is, but I think the core thesis is sound. Stablecoins have real utility for cross-border payments, and integrating them into existing payment systems is smarter than trying to replace those systems. The execution is what's uncertain.
Zoom out for me. If SQRIL succeeds, if this model works, what does that actually mean for crypto?
I think it's part of a broader story we're seeing in 2025 and 2026, which is that crypto's maturing from speculation to infrastructure. We're moving past the phase where the technology itself is the product and into the phase where it's just plumbing.
Nobody cares about TCP/IP. They care about the internet.
Exactly. And most people aren't going to care about blockchain architecture or which stablecoin they're using. They're going to care whether they can send money to their family cheaply or pay for things when traveling or run a business that accepts international payments easily. If crypto enables that invisibly, it wins.
Does that mean the big winners in crypto won't be the ones making the flashiest consumer apps?
Some will, but I think a lot of value is going to accrue to infrastructure that's boring and invisible. Payment rails, settlement layers, custody solutions, APIs that let traditional finance talk to decentralized systems. SQRIL is basically betting they can be one of those boring, valuable infrastructure plays.
And the emerging markets focus is strategic.
Very. These markets have the most to gain from better financial infrastructure. They're also more willing to experiment because the existing systems serve them poorly, so you get the motivation to adopt and the regulatory space to try things. That's a powerful combination.
All right, bottom line, Tether invests in SQRIL. Is this worth paying attention to?
I think so. Not because it's going to change crypto overnight, but because it's a signal of where real adoption might actually happen. Less, will this token moon? More, can this infrastructure quietly solve real problems for millions of people? That's the kind of story that doesn't make flashy headlines, but ends up mattering more.
And if you're someone interested in crypto who's tired of speculation and hype,
watch the payment infrastructure space. Watch what's happening in markets that need this technology most, and remember that the most important developments often look boring at first.
that's it for today. Thanks for listening to Infinite State.
See you next time.